Hello. Those of you in America might not be aware that it was a football final last night and Britain lost, England lost, but it was a very good game. It was a real nail biter. They lost on penalties. It went into extra time, and in the end, it depended on just one. Sorry, excuse me. My dog's brought me my slipper. I find slippers all over the house. I have about 3 pairs of those slip-on flip-flop type things, and I'm walking around in mismatched ones all the time because one of them is missing and the other one is, I don't know, in the attic or in the kitchen or in the hallway. Oh no, not again. I might cut this down. Look, I was talking about football. Now, what happened was it was a real nail biter of a game and it went to penalties and it went to extra time, and then it depended on one penalty shot. And the poor chap who had been chosen to make the shot missed. And of course, there are a lot of disappointed football fans. But what is notable about the whole, not again, that's enough now. What is notable about the whole business is this. I didn't see it, but I saw on Twitter that an hour after the game finished, the BBC ran a programme or a segment in the news or whatever on racism in football. And in the morning, The Guardian is running an article about Boris Johnson condemning the appalling racist abuse of England players. Now, let's just try and deal with this in small pieces. First of all, the BBC, I don't know what sort of a show it was, whether it was a whole show or just some commentator talking to the microphone, but it was obviously prepared ahead of time, wasn't it? The BBC don't broadcast anything that they haven't programmed, except perhaps an important death, in which case an announcer might come on, make the announcement, and then they go back to the standard programming. They have diary scheduling, don't they? So they were preparing for this. So you can imagine them before the show, before the football match, sitting there in their conference rooms, thinking, now what can we put on after the England match? And so what are they thinking of? A history of the English football team, the British football teams in general, the history of football, the history of the Euro competitions, and just everything, anything, but no. The history of racism in British football, or comments about it. Now, you can imagine them sitting there thinking, this is going to work one way or the other. If England wins, we can bring people down a notch. And if England loses, wow, we can really get at it. Racism is the problem. And it's a very common thing among the media now, who consider themselves the elite. And this is where I bring you American viewers in, because I can well imagine that MSNBC or CNN or whatever would do the same thing if America took the trouble to enter any world competitions. And don't give me that thing about the World Series. We all know baseball is just an American game. It's not the World Series. It's football that's the world sport. And Britain was, England rather. I do keep making this mistake. When I was a kid, everyone talked about England and they meant Britain. And then it became all PC, and now everyone has to talk about Britain rather than England. And so you get into the habit. When I was at university, when I was at school, they called it the Renaissance. That's what I learned at school, to call that period in European history when people started rediscovering the classics properly and digging up archaeology and learning about anatomy and, Leonardo da Vinci and Botticelli and all those guys. That was called the Renaissance. Then when I got to university, I discovered it wasn't the Renaissance at all. It was the Renaissance. I had to pronounce it the Renaissance. So I spent a long time learning to say Renaissance. And blow me down, now it's the Renaissance again, and I have to remember that. Fashion, you see? Now, but that is actually part of the whole business, because I'm talking about elite speak. The elite like to show that they're the elite by using certain code words, certain code attitudes. And the racism of the English, well, they say the English here because they don't want to bring in the Welsh and the Scots. The English, the racism of the English is appalling. It appalls them. It hurts their sensibilities. And that's the way they can keep those people at their arm's length. And it's funny, Jilly Cooper wrote a book called Classes. I read it about 100 years ago now, but she spoke about how the middle classes were far more snobbish about the working classes than the aristocrats were, and that the aristocrats and the working classes were very close, both in their attitudes to general sanitation and just life in general. It's a more practical attitude, I'd say. Whereas the middle classes, because they are so close to the working classes, they are terrified all the time of slipping into there. So they have to keep them at arm's length. It's, I think, something that's going on now in America as well, all over the world, as a matter of fact. There is a nascent middle class in every country, and they are trying to establish their ascendancy over the upper class and the working class. So what do? They poke fun at the upper class for being a bunch of toffs, and they despise the working class because that's the only way they can differentiate themselves, because a lot of working class people are richer than they are. Remember, the working class guy who's a plumber, reminds me of a joke about a woman who calls a plumber to her house, and it's like Christmas Eve or something, and he comes in and he does the work, and he gets it right, and then he presents her with the bill, and it's something like £500, and the woman says to this guy, £500. So I said, well, yeah, time and a half, Christmas Eve, this couple of parts. And she says, but £500, a consultant surgeon doesn't charge that much for doing a job that lasts an hour. And the guy says, yeah, I know, I used to be a consultant surgeon. All right, well, you get the picture. The consultant surgeon is the middle classes. That plumber, or, as the plumber, is the working classes. But they're richer than... I remember when we were working on our house, one of the plasterers, I think, mentioned that he had a house in, I don't know what, Spain or something. I can't afford a house in Spain. He had one, or he was going skiing. He was going skiing over Christmas to some place I couldn't afford. That sort of thing. Well, look, I am not that part of the middle class that despise the working class. Good luck to them is what I say. If it weren't for plumbers, this house would be a frozen wasteland, and we'd be drawing water from a well we'd have to dig in the garden. No, but there are many, and they tend, in the middle classes, who despise the working classes, and they want to keep them at a distance, and they want to use these people, but they don't want to feel any fellow feeling from them. And these sorts of people, not always, but they seem to gravitate to the media. For some reason, the media is the important career. No, it isn't. It's going downhill, boys. You'll have to learn that the hard way, won't you? Anyway, they go into the media, and then they project their middle class angst or worries about slipping back into the working class by pointing at the England supporters, and by England supporters they mean working class England supporters. So the BBC, oh yeah, we've got to put these people down. So if we win, we've got to dampen it down to make sure that we aren't their type, to show that. And then if it's a loss, then well, we can really make hay out of this. Now, I'm quite sure there were some people saying terrible things. This is the England team. Look at that. And if you look at the news reports, you'll see the supporters there in the stands singing Sweet Caroline with all their hearts. Those were the people who were supporting them. And then you get the occasional, and it will be occasional because millions were supporting these people, and how many of them were tweeting about the racial composition of the team? I'd say very few. And instead of concentrating on that, the BBC runs that planned article on racism in football, and The Guardian, of course, says Boris Johnson condemns appalling racist abuse. Yes, he will have condemned it. He'd have to condemn it. But that doesn't mean to say that this is something we should be concentrating on. Boris Johnson has condemned the appalling racist abuse on social media, directed at a number of England players after their defeat to Italy in the Euro 2020 final. The Metropolitan Police have also opened an investigation into the abuse. Well, this is something they shouldn't be doing. Now, if somebody had been threatening physical harm, yes, that they should have done. But abuse, bad temper, drunken ramblings, some of them, I don't know. I haven't read any of them. I'm just making these assumptions. But going on form, I reckon I'm probably fairly accurate. The Prime Minister tweeted his condemnation on Monday morning. Well, what's he supposed to do? Yes, after the Football Association issued a statement shortly after the game finished describing disgusting behaviour. No, what you have to say is behaviour of some, behaviour that shamed some, behaviour that was not typical of all. No, just disgusting behaviour. It's like those guys made everybody bad, and that's not true. Shortly after the game finished, describing disgusting behaviour among some fans online and urging police to implement the toughest punishments possible. You shouldn't be able to punish somebody who makes a racial epithet at a player or anybody. You really shouldn't be able to punish them. You should be able to punish them if they make physical threats, if they incite violence, if they encourage other people to be physically unfriendly towards people of whatever. Shopkeepers, football players, whatever. But you shouldn't be able to punish people for saying rude words. And that's something that we can do in this country now, and we shouldn't be able to. And I'd be fighting very hard to remedy that. And I do wish Boris Johnson would do that too, because you can't get, the law is a very blunt instrument. You can't get into people's minds. All it can do is keep people reasonably civil to each other in their normal interchange with each other in life. But getting into their minds, that is a very slippery slope. That's Inquisition slippery slope type stuff. The Labour MP David Lammy. Oh, yes, here's a bandwagon. Hold that. I want to catch it. The Labour MP David Lammy also criticised the racist abuse. I'll bet he's really irritated that he didn't get in before Johnson on that one. Targeted at the three players, Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho and Bukayo Saka, who failed to score their spot kicks in the penalty shootout, resulting in a 3-2 loss to Italy at Wembley. He wrote, "This is why we take the knee." No, it isn't. And it is not why we take the knee. It's ridiculous. Taking the knee it's the one thing that took my joy out of. I didn't watch the match because I just generally I do object to. Well, I can't watch the match anyway because I don't pay a television license. I didn't watch it live, but I don't watch these matches because it embarrasses me so much to see my players of my team, whichever team I happen to be supporting at the time. I'm not a big football supporter. I just go for what seems to be fun at the time. If they kneel down before, if they all knelt to the Queen, I'd be quite happy. But to a how do I put this without YouTube getting at me? Okay, to kneel to somebody who had a less than conventional attitude towards the upkeep of the law and to certain medicinal substances. That's not a person to kneel for, right? Okay. The FA strongly condemns all forms of discrimination, and is appalled by the online racism that's been aimed at some of our England players on social media. Yes, by a minority of stinkers, and you will get a minority of stinkers everywhere, even on The Guardian and in the BBC. I know, because I've been there. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.